big am I old going to be called old school to a youngster?
Oh.
As Scott Baldwin's health continued to decline, he finally agreed to do something he'd been resisting for a few months. He was transferred to the prison hospice unit.
Before it was all, hey, old school. Now it's, hey, junior, hey, youngster, because the guy who's next in age above me is 72.
You're the baby here.
Yes.
There was no realistic chance that Scott's conviction could be overturned in time for him to make it home. No matter what new evidence we uncovered, no matter what we found, there was no chance that he would make it out of prison before he died. Except there was a chance that had not existed 6 months earlier. Because in 2025, the Supreme Court of Michigan ruled that Michigan's Constitution prohibited mandatory life sentences without parole for those under 21 years of age.
And when this crime happened, Scott Baldwin was 19 years old. So
that's right.
He is suddenly eligible for a new sentence.
Claire Ward is a public defender with the State Appellate Defender's Office. She was assigned as Scott's attorney for resentencing. Scott Baldwin now had a possible pathway home. The state was required to resentence him.
25 to 60 years is the sentence that we are asking for, and Scott would be parole eligible off of that sentence. We expect he would see the parole board very shortly, possibly later this month or next month.
Scott had served 24 and a half years, which meant that he could be paroled almost immediately, but only if the court agreed that he deserved the shortest sentence possible.
It almost seems like for Scott, though, innocence is working against him in a way. If he was guilty and always said he was guilty, it feels like this process would be a lot easier for him.
Well, that's often the case with clients who have maintained a claim of innocence, because what the court wants to see is remorse. Everybody knows that what they need to do is tell the court, I'm so sorry, I made a terrible mistake, I'll never do it again. And if you can't say that because you didn't do it in the first place, then you're definitely walking in at a disadvantage.
For Scott, a sentence of anything more than the minimum 25 years would essentially be a death sentence. It would mean he would die in prison before he had a chance of parole. He would have to convince a judge he was worthy of the most lenient punishment allowed under the law. So for Scott, resentencing might mean facing his own prisoner's dilemma.
Now, what if you come across a judge who wants you to admit guilt? Then what do you do?
They were to say, we'd let you out tomorrow if you tell us you did it. I'd look at them and probably say, what do you want me to say?
Yeah.
What do you want me to tell you? Let me go home tomorrow. Then I can go see a real doctor and I can go get real treatment. Jane's like, no, don't you dare. And I'm like, I want to come home, Jane. I don't care what they think.
I'm Susan Simpson.
And I'm Jacinda Davis.
I'm an attorney and investigator.
And I'm a true crime TV producer.
And this is Proof Season 3, Murder at the Bike Shop. Proof is a Red Marble Media production in association with Glassbox Media.
New episodes are released on Mondays, and on Thursdays you can catch our sidebar episodes where we talk about the case, talk to guests, and tell you more about what's going on behind the scenes.
This is episode 10, The Wrong Fish. Scott's resentencing hearing was set for September 12th, 2025. We were back in Kalamazoo for it. We had a couple days before the hearing, though, and that meant another chance to go out and investigate. Another chance to go out and try and find Alan Nutter. Alan Nutter has been the primary alternate suspect in this case ever since Scott Baldwin's defense attorneys found out about him, shortly after Scott was convicted. He had reportedly confessed to killing Earl O'Byrne well over a dozen times. His own daughter had even claimed that he confessed to her that he'd done it. And he matched the description of the man that was seen outside the bike shop on the night Earl O'Byrne was killed. We knew Nutter was in Kalamazoo still. We'd heard from lots of people who had seen him recently, panhandling at different places around town. And on previous trips, we'd spent hours looking for him, without any luck. Maybe this trip, our luck would finally change.
anytime we go in the street, we could find him. We disagree on whether we should try and stop any time. I think if we see him, we have to pounce.
I don't know. I mean, when we were here before, we were like, he's not one we want to talk to alone.
No, I'm not scared of Nutter. If we see him, we have to. We have to take the chance. But we haven't actually seen him yet, so.
No.
By the end of our first day back in Kalamazoo, we still hadn't found him. But we now knew we were close to finding him. Like, really close.
What we did learn from driving around Kalamazoo is that Nutter was now downtown and actually staying at this place where people can go, basically across the street from the hotel.
Yeah, literally across the street from the hotel.
In the end, it turned out that all we needed to do to find Alan Nutter was to walk across the street to a homeless shelter where he'd been staying. We found someone willing to pass on a message to Alan Nutter for us. He agreed to talk. And before long, we were talking to him face to face in a small conference room.
I'm Susan.
Susan?
This is Jacinda.
I'm Kevin. Kevin? Yeah, Alan. That's me. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. We're looking into the old Scott Baldwin case.
He's out now, isn't he?
No.
He's still alive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You know?
Although Alan was willing to speak to us, he was, understandably, a little skeptical too.
I would like to see end result to this, because this is getting tiresome, you know? I mean, no, you can't imagine. I don't know what people want me to say. I really don't know anything about it. You know, I understand. I do. If I got framed and put in prison and set a long time, I would be pissed. I would be very angry. But if he's innocent, all I'm saying is I ain't do it. So somebody else obviously did, and I don't know who it is, you know? When that happened, I thought it was just crazy, you know, because the old man was nice. Both of them were, you know. They didn't deserve nothing like that. I've done crazy things, but I ain't never hurt nobody like that. How can I prove that I did not do that? I'm telling you I didn't.
There's a lot of people who say they heard you confess, basically.
Bullshit.
So, do you have any guesses about where that story could have come from, or like why?
It looks bad. You know, I understand that, but you got the wrong picture. You got to throw a different bait out there.
Would you have ever said you did it just to, like, brag about it?
Yeah, I might have said something like that. It's possible.
It's possible you said you did it just to...
But I didn't do a thing. But it's nothing to mess with, you know. But when you know you didn't do something, you can brag about doing something that you didn't do.
Alan Nutter acknowledged, more or less, that he may have bragged about doing the murder before, that he may have confessed to it at some point. But, he told us, not as many times as he's been accused of confessing. Sometimes, he said, people will accuse others of crimes just to get back at them for some past disputes. And that's what happened to him.
If you hated somebody for any reason, had a vendetta or a grudge, I don't know, maybe you're not like that, but there's a lot of people that are.
Nutter did not want to get into any specifics of who he may have confessed to or what the wording of those confessions may have been. But regardless of anything he may have said, he told us, he had not killed Earl O'Byrne.
I'm innocent. They say innocent until proven guilty, but nowadays it seems like you're guilty until proven innocent.
Did you know that they did DNA testing on the old man?
No.
They found DNA, but it doesn't match your profile.
Because I didn't do it. That's why I don't match.
Nutter denied any involvement in Earl's murder. But he did tell us something that caught my attention.
Years ago, Ben Brewer and my half-brother, they broke in there and got a bunch of money. I remember talking about it, and they said they've got quite a bit of money out of the bike shop.
What does quite a bit mean?
Thousands.
Oh, so real money.
Yeah. Well, just chump change. You used to keep in shoe boxes and all kinds of shit in there, you know.
We later found the police report that showed what Nutter was talking about here. In 1976, his friend and his half-brother had stolen a box that was hidden under Earl and Johnny's beds. It had $10,000 in it. And I was reminded of something that Nutter's daughter, Brooke, had told police back in 2009, when she told them a rambling story about how her dad had confessed to her that he'd done the murder at the bike shop. Brooke's story seems to have conflated two different murder cases, both of which her dad had allegedly had some kind of connection to. And much of what Brooke remembered seems to have been about this other murder, not the bike shop. But not all of it. Some of what Brooke said her dad had told her was definitely about the bike shop. Here's her explaining to the police why he'd even wanted to break in there.
What did you hear, Ed?
I heard that there was another male, possibly one of my dad's friends.
So this other guy may have known more about where he kept the money in the...
Yeah. Like details about the box of money, or shoebox is what I think I was told.
But you remember him saying something about that was supposed to be a lick for money that was in a box?
Yeah, the shoebox.
This part of Brooke's story now seemed entirely believable. Because here was Alan Nutter telling us himself that he knew people who had known where a shoebox full of money, $10,000 even, had been hidden inside the bike shop. Which means, potentially, he could have believed he knew where more money was hidden inside the shop. And Nutter admitted to us that just a night or two before the bike shop murder, he'd been busy breaking in and robbing another store off of East Michigan Avenue. You broke into the John Deere shop.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
You stole a weed whacker or something?
Yeah, there's like a lot of them, probably 40, 50 and $200 weed eaters.
We now knew Alan Nutter was someone who had successfully robbed the bike shop in the past, and that he had believed back then that there was money hidden inside the bike shop that could be found. It certainly could explain why he might try and break in. And there was another possible connection between Nutter and the bike shop that we didn't know if any previous investigators had ever asked him about. That's the antique wrench with blood and hair on it that was purportedly found at a house where a woman named Trudy Field lived. We did hear you had a lot of girlfriends back then.
Yeah? Yeah. What's wrong with that? I'm male.
It just sounds like
not a crime.
It's a lot of work. Multiple girlfriends at the same time. Who was your favorite girlfriend from that time?
Oh boy, she was a woman named Trudy Field.
What was she like?
She was a whore. But a good whore. Best I ever had.
What about Dwayne Field?
Yeah, that's her son.
Did you know he was a suspect?
He was.
You didn't know that?
No, I did not know that.
Did anyone ever mention a bloody wrench to you?
No ma'am.
Did you ever stay over at their house over on East Main?
Oh yeah.
So after his family moved out in that house, they found a bloody wrench under the porch with human hair on it.
Pointing toward Dwayne. Gotta be. I sure you leave no bloody wrench over there.
And apparently, the landlord had heard Dwayne talking about how he was mad at the old man for shortchanging his checks when he was working at the bike shop.
That don't look good for Dwayne. That's what I'm thinking now. Why don't he test the blood with nothing wrench? Why did they get
They lost it. They lost it.
That's bullshit. That is straight up bullshit. But if I was a detective, that's where my focus would be.
Dwayne?
Yep.
Like Alan Nutter, we were interested in Dwayne Field too. His mother Trudy had died. So Dwayne might be the only other person we could talk to who might have more information about the bloody wrench mystery. But Dwayne is not the one who had confessed, repeatedly, to killing Earl O'Byrne. Alan Nutter did that. But why? Why had he really confessed? And had there been any truth to what he said?
Can you explain to us again why maybe you would have told people you did this? Just help us understand that.
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know. Other than give it a rep, but there's nothing to play with, you know. I understand that. But this Scott Baldwin, what's he killed to in prison? Why didn't they release him? That makes no sense to me.
It's not that easy.
Well,
he never could prove enough. A lot of people think he's innocent, but the court requires a whole lot of proof.
Can you imagine not being in line for 25 years and you know you didn't do something? How do you think that makes you feel? I can't even wrap my brain around that one.
Well, that's why people keep coming back.
You know what? If that information you just said to me, though, about
the wrench,
Dwayne and that wrench, that don't look good. That don't look good at all.
Our interview with Alan Nutter came to a rather abrupt end.
So Kevin was with us during the interview, standing. So it was Susan on one side of the table, me on the other, and Alan in the wheelchair at the end, and Kevin kind of standing by the door. But anyway, at one point, Kevin had to leave. Within, I swear, it was 30 seconds.
He stands up from his wheelchair. He kind of walks towards Susan and lifts up his shirt. I thought he was showing me a tattoo or something. I don't know. My brain, I was like, this is a logical thing that must make sense.
and in my brain, I was like, is he going to like rub his belly in Susan's face?
It really...
Like, it looked like he was looming over you.
My brain was not even processing that. I was just like, oh, what are we looking at now?
I was ready to jump in and knock him over the head with the microphone.
It wasn't until he said, I'm pretty tan, aren't I? That I was like, oh.
But it came so out of the blue. I mean, at that point, the interview's
we're like,
over. And he starts to walk out of the room. And I said, Alan, do you need your wheelchair? Oh, yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
I walked out of there feeling, how come it isn't Alan Nutter that got wrongfully convicted of this crime?
Kind of a horrible thought, in a way. Like, you don't want anyone to be wrongfully convicted.
But how is he not the one that got wrongfully convicted?
Right. The evidence against him is actually...
Really?
It's all circumstantial, but
it's a lot. And he keeps adding to it.
Alan Nutter said he was innocent, that he had not killed Earl O'Byrne. But there had at least been a few times where he'd confessed that he had. Not only was he blonde, like the man Officer West saw outside the bike shop that night, but he also dressed like the guy Officer West saw. And he had access to Trudy Field's car, which looked like the car that Officer West saw. He had also broken into another store in the middle of the night and robbed it, just days before Earl was killed. And Nutter knew, or thought he knew, that Earl kept shoeboxes full of money hidden inside the shop. And there's that bloody wrench with hair on it that was found at his girlfriend's house, just down the road from the bike shop.
I don't know. There are some things that I still wonder about. He's not in my totally ruled out list. He just can't be. There's too much. I don't think he did it. I just can't make it fit.
Yeah. I mean, I keep going back to what we know from Karen and Lori, the two employees that we've talked to.
And the interaction that was seen by Officer West.
Right. The fact that Earl is outside the shop, like, that wouldn't be Alan. There's no way Earl would open the door.
Alan Nutter had been right about one thing, though. We did need to talk to Dwayne Field. And for once, luck was in our favor.
He didn't want to be recorded, but he confirmed for us that he had worked at the bike shop sometime before Earl's death, that Earl had, in fact, shortchanged him on some pay, and he was annoyed or pissed off about it.
Dwayne Field told us he had nothing to do with Earl's murder. And he also told us a bit about his mom's boyfriend, Alan Nutter. He hadn't liked him. He knew he'd been a suspect in the bike shop case, but he had no knowledge about whether he'd actually been involved. Though, he said, I wouldn't put it past him.
To me, the big thing was that he also said the police had asked him about Alan Nutter.
Yeah, it wasn't clear when or in what context, but...
He seemed pretty confident they had asked him about Nutter, which would suggest the police did know he was dating Trudy Field.
This could be significant, because why would detectives ask Dwayne about Alan Nutter unless they knew that he was dating Dwayne's mom, Trudy Field? And that connection isn't something that's recorded in any documents from the police file.
That kind of implies they knew about the bloody wrench being found under Alan Nutter's girlfriend's porch and didn't tell the defense about it. Doesn't prove it, but it certainly suggests it.
Scott Baldwin's defense attorneys definitely did not know about the connection between Alan Nutter and the house with the bloody wrench. At trial, they'd instead tried to suggest that 16-year-old Dwayne Field might be the actual killer. But there was no other evidence against Dwayne, and the jury had not been convinced it was a reason to doubt Scott's guilt. What Scott's defense team hadn't known, though, was that there was a man named Alan Nutter who had repeatedly confessed to killing Earl O'Byrne, and that he, too, had regularly stayed at the Bloody Wrench house. This could be a Brady violation if the detectives had known this fact and didn't tell the defense.
But if the cops knew that and didn't disclose it, well, that's not good. So, of course, that's not in writing anywhere. I don't know how Scott would prove that. But he seemed to me very confident that the police had known about Alan Nutter.
There's no way to prove it now. And with Scott's death, it has no legal significance anyway. But it is a reminder of how brutally unfair Scott Baldwin's trial was. Because if Scott's defense team had known about all of this before trial, I don't think Scott would have spent the last 25 years of his life in prison.
While in Kalamazoo, we also wanted to talk to the original investigators who'd worked on the bike shop murder. Almost all of them are retired now.
Do you recall at all the Earl O'Byrne murder?
I know that it occurred, but the details of any involvement I may have had with it, I currently don't remember.
That's retired City Police Detective Dennis Anderson. Back in 1988, he was one of the officers that helped secure the bike shop crime scene. He didn't remember much about it, which isn't surprising. He had only had a minor role in the investigation. But he did know someone who'd been more heavily involved in the case. The original lead detective, Bob Jenkins.
I've discussed this with him. I told him that you were coming, and I asked him whether he would be willing to speak to you.
Was he not?
He does not want to have anything to do with it. That's part of that. I don't want to call it a culture. When something that is bad as this is, you want to ignore it. That's kind of what this is like for some of these people.
Detective Anderson understands the impulse to try and ignore what happened with the Kalamazoo cold case team. But he made the decision to speak openly about it anyway.
There's a certain cost to even the little involvement that I put into it for me personally. There's people who cold shoulder me. It has created friction with people who I consider to be friends, especially in the Jeff Titus case. But I'm willing to accept that.
Detective Anderson hadn't known any of the details about the Jeff Titus case until he watched the Killer in Question episode about Jeff's case on Discovery ID. He'd been shocked by what he saw.
If you came to me 3 years ago and told me what happened, I would have fought you to the death. There's no way someone from my department did that. There's no way. But now I'm absolutely certain it occurred. It's just heartbreaking.
What happened to Jeff Titus shows that something went wrong with the cold case team, Anderson told us. But he insisted that most of the detectives assigned to the unit had been trying to do the right thing.
I think that for the most part, they were like everybody else. You know, they had a job to do. And then some people were introduced into the cold case team whose moral compass maybe didn't have a needle on it. You have to understand that Mike Workman is in the cold case team as a lieutenant. My 2 cents about Mike Workman is he had to have attention. He required a lot of positive reinforcement. After Jeff Titus had his conviction reversed by the federal court and was released, he was still talking to Channel 8 News about that Jeff Titus had really committed the crimes.
I still believe Jeff Titus is a killer, yes. But you know what? There could have been a turn. Based on his character, the things that he did, yes, he's the killer. He's a dangerous man, and I'm pretty much afraid of him.
That's Detective Mike Workema back in 2023, speaking to Wood TV News.
He had to have known. There's no way in hell that Jeff Titus committed that crime. And they've, in my view, overlooked other evidence. They tampered with witnesses.
In Jeff Titus's case, there was a key witness who initially told detectives that she'd seen Jeff near the crime scene several hours after 2 hunters were killed. But the cold case team re-interviewed her again and again until her story changed and placed Jeff near the crime scene just minutes after it occurred. Detective Anderson does not believe this interviewing technique is legitimate, that it produces witness statements that reflect what detectives want to hear, rather than what actually happened. And in Anderson's view, Detective Workema had to have known that too.
Mike Workema says in the original interview you have, I sometimes have to help people remember. So I had to go out and help her remember. Keep interviewing her until she tells you something that you like.
You've already heard this clip from Killer in Question in a previous episode, but this is what Anderson is referring to.
When people say, no, I don't remember, and I would convince them, yeah, I do remember, I'm just not too sure I want to talk. And then it's a process. I would meet people 3, 4, maybe 6 times.
What makes you think that's not wrong? That's illogical.
Detective Anderson told us that based on his own personal experiences with Detective Workema, it makes perfect sense to him that witnesses might have been unwittingly led into changing their statements. He can see how it might have happened.
He's also, forever, has tried to suggest to people to do things his way without using their own common sense. For example, if I look at that wall and say it's blue, Mike goes, oh no, it's green. You need to make that green. And some people might buy into that.
The way you feel about what happened to Jeff, is there a possibility in your mind that Jeff's not the only one that happened to?
I'm certain of it. Do I have any proof of it? No, but I'm certain of it.
If something happened with cold case team investigations, something that potentially led to wrongful convictions, it couldn't have gone completely unnoticed. Other police officers must have noticed things. But there's a wall of silence that stops those stories from getting out.
The vast majority of people that I've talked to see if they would be willing to talk about this case, the vast majority didn't want anything to do with it. It's equally as disappointing to me as it is to you.
Yeah.
It's shocking how some people won't.
It is hard to get police officers to speak about police misconduct. It's kind of another version of a no-snitching culture. Some members of law enforcement have been willing to speak to us, like cold case detective Rich Madison, but most are not willing to speak, and many of the ones who do are reluctant to do so openly. I don't want to get into trouble, they'll explain. Detective Anderson was definitely not the only police officer in Kalamazoo who had concerns about some of the investigations done by Detective Mike Workema. But asking police officers to elaborate on those concerns can put them in an awkward spot. Do you know the cold case team?
Yes. Mike Workema was my supervisor in the detective bureau.
Oh, so you are familiar with him?
Yes.
Any stories you'd like to share?
No.
Another police officer told us, there's a lot of people who think Workema tainted a lot of cases. Then that officer asked for his own name not to be brought up. When we asked him for examples of what Workema may have done, he'd made a cryptic comment. There are people who will cut corners and change things to make the narrative fit what they want. At the same time, for me, the idea that what happened with the Kalamazoo cold case team is somehow due to a single detective does not hold up. There are too many examples of cold case witnesses changing their statements in disturbing ways, even in cases that Workema had nothing to do with. Although I will acknowledge it is hard not to notice how often Workema's name comes up in some of the more troubling aspects of the cold cases. We reached out to Workema for comment, but he has not responded.
Workema seems to be a very common theme in a lot of these cases that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, he was their go-to guy with the cold case stuff for years.
That's Kalamazoo Chief Judge Gary Jaguar. We spoke to him earlier this season about the case of his former client, Roberto Davanzo. As Roberto's defense attorney, Judge Jaguar experienced firsthand the techniques used by the Kalamazoo cold case team. One thing they'd done in Roberto's case was to go out to prisons and talk to inmates who had done time with him over the years. Then the cold case team would pull out a tape player and have them listen to part of a recorded confession that Roberto made back in 1980. A confession that was deemed to have been coerced and involuntary, and so had been tossed out. The cold case team couldn't use that confession in court, but they could use it out of court.
They actually played recordings of the statements, and then it would be, does that change your mind about what you remember?
Right. And so it's a workaround to get those statements seen and heard.
Or, to clean it up and to get the witness to maybe flesh out the statement a little more than they were comfortable doing beforehand.
As Judge Jaguar noted, this method of interviewing jailhouse informants allowed them to flesh out their stories of Roberto confessing to them. For the record, though, I'd like to note, it did a lot more than that, too. Because, hypothetically, if the jailhouse informant was fabricating an entire story about Roberto confessing to them, then what the cold case team was doing was giving that informant all the information they needed to make up a lie.
It was effective for the cold case investigative team.
It was effective, yes, but only in a limited sense. By interviewing jailhouse informants the way the cold case team did, are you likely to generate evidence that will help you convince a jury to convict the defendant? Yes. But are you likely to get truthful information about what really happened? I would argue almost certainly not. Jailhouse informants are just not reliable evidence. Because they are almost always being rewarded in some form or fashion in exchange for testifying in support of the prosecution's case. That's just how it works. And a jailhouse informant who doesn't have any truthful information that they can trade for favors can just make up a lie instead and get rewarded for that. So in order to convince juries that a jailhouse informant should be believed anyway, police and prosecutors do everything they can to make it seem like the informant is testifying solely out of the goodness of their own heart. That's what happened with the informants in Roberto D'Avanzo's case.
And they all testified that they weren't getting anything from the prosecutor. Although one of them mysteriously gets paroled.
Oh.
Detective Didow had sent a letter on behalf of this witness, Daniel Johnson, saying that he was cooperating with the police. So this Daniel Johnson gets paroled.
After the cold case team met with informant Daniel Johnson in prison, he'd written him a letter. "I have information for you about Roberto," he wrote, "but I have 3 conditions for providing it. The second condition was, I will not testify at any proceeding until I am on parole status." 2 months later, cold case detective Didow wrote a letter to the parole board, urging them to grant parole for Johnson. That seems pretty much like a favor done in exchange for testimony, right? But the prosecution found a way to explain that it was not a favor at all.
They bring in the head of the Michigan Parole Board to say that they don't consider letters from prosecutors or police and that it wouldn't make any difference. And in any event, this guy was just ready for parole and they didn't even get the letter. So the letter wouldn't have counted if it got there, but it never got there. And he was just ready to get paroled.
That's a fortunate coincidence.
Right.
I mean, sending a letter to the parole board is just out of the kindness of your heart.
Right. That's highly unusual.
The prosecution was able to tell the jury that nothing the cold case team had done was actually helpful to Daniel Johnson. So they should believe that Johnson was just a good Samaritan who testified against Roberto because it was the right thing to do. In fact, Johnson was so committed to doing the right thing that he'd previously been a jailhouse informant for another case too.
And that he got paroled in 2000 after some cell phone incident where he had testified against another inmate.
The other jailhouse informants in Roberto's case had similar stories.
And somebody else got paroled while this was happening. So this detective, who was it regarding? John Schur. Detective Han Logan went to his parole hearing.
Cold case detective Han Logan had wrote in one of his reports that informant John Schur, who had gotten out of prison, had now been arrested again. The report notes, "Schur's willingness to testify has diminished somewhat. With this in mind, I testified at Shore's parole hearing. Shore was not granted parole. It was ultimately decided that any further attempts to help Shore secure an early parole would be counterproductive. But then Detective Hanlogton contacted the Michigan Department of Corrections and asked, quote, if there were any options available that would allow Shore to finish his sentence outside of the Michigan prison system. Hanlogton's report is careful to note, though, that detectives had not provided any assistance to Shore. Quote, this is the normal course of events with the correction system and does not constitute any type of special treatment. Okay, come on. The only word for this is bullshit. Everyone knows what's actually going on here. Everyone, that is, except for the jury, who were told that no deals whatsoever had been done in exchange for the informant's testimony. What the cold case team did here is legal, but it wasn't aimed at finding the truth. It was aimed at making sure that Roberto Davanzo got convicted.
I mean, their aggressive tactics. With this case that I was intimately involved in, it seemed like once they knew who he was, what he was in prison for, it was just a matter of find the trail that leads us there.
Roberto's criminal history made him an appealing suspect for investigators. When Patty was killed, he'd been in prison for armed robbery. He had done stick-ups at a few McDonald's. And when you have a murdered college co-ed, her felon boyfriend is probably the killer, right? But then the charges against Roberto were dropped. He served out his sentence and got out of prison a few years later. Before too long, though, he robbed a few more McDonald's and went right back to prison. That's where he was when the cold case team reopened the case and decided to focus on him as a suspect.
The sad part is the wrongful convictions that get overturned usually aren't these kind. It doesn't have a lot of curb appeal.
This is another common theme with the Kalamazoo cold case team. Usually, they targeted defendants that many would not consider sympathetic. I'm reminded of Joe Williams from the Polderman case, and a comment he made on one of my first phone calls with him.
I'm a piece of shit, don't get me wrong. What kind of guy goes around stealing out of cars? Decent person wouldn't do that.
The same goes for Scott Baldwin. At 19, he'd been sketchy. He was stealing out of cars too. He had grown out of that. At 31, when he was arrested, he had a white-collar job and a young family, but his personal life was still kind of messy. And Scott testified in his own defense, which allowed Prosecutor Fenton to hit him with everything he'd done in his life that the jury might find distasteful. Fenton asked Scott, "You were a thief, right? You cheated on your wife, correct? You lied about writing the song Butterfly?" And as for Jeff Titus, he had no criminal record. I believe he's one of only 2 cold case defendants who can say that. But he is, and I'm just going to be blunt here, socially awkward in a way that made him vulnerable. He doesn't always catch on to social cues, and that's something that others can interpret in all kinds of ways. Here's what Detective Workema said about him on Killer in Question.
Oh, his arrogance. As the time progressed, he got more arrogant in what he did. Jeff Titus put himself in prison with his mouth.
Another cold case suspect who almost put himself in prison with his own words is Richard Vendeville, the informant for cold case detective Mike Workema, who, in 2002, tried to claim that he knew who had committed the Polderman triple homicide. Because he had dropped the guy off at the scene, he said, and in doing so had placed himself at the crime scene as well. But Vendeville had escaped getting convicted in that case. He had pointed the finger at 5 other people who were convicted instead. We wanted to talk to Richard Vendeville for ourselves. Not just about the Polderman case, but about a lot of other things too. Because Vendeville is connected in some way to an absurd number of the Kalamazoo cold cases. Far more than what seems statistically probable. And Vendeville also claims to have all kinds of improbable-seeming knowledge about what really happened in various cold cases. With Vendeville, finding him wasn't really the hard part. The hard part had been convincing him to talk to us. That took a while. We'd let him know that we were hoping to record an interview for the podcast. He wasn't ready to agree to that. But he did say he'd be willing to meet Jacinda and Kevin in person for an initial conversation. And from there, we could figure out next steps.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So tell me everything.
He's like oddly attractive, Susan.
Okay.
That is not what I expected.
When I first saw him, I was like taken aback. Like he just had like a dermabrasion brush or something. I definitely was like ready to clean my glasses because I was confused.
If you want a visual, he looks like Ryan Seacrest's brother.
Again, not what I expected.
We weren't sure what to expect out of this initial meeting with Richard Vendeville. But right away, he'd given a clue as to why he might have decided to show up.
The first thing he said to me is, how much is this worth to you? And I said, if I paid you, I'd be no different than Workema, so it's worth a lot, but I'm not going to pay you.
When he was acting as an informant for Detective Workema, Richard Vendeville had received reward funds from Silent Observer in exchange for the information he provided. Vendeville is someone who is very aware of the value of information. I think by nature, it's something he's just not inclined to give up for free. But he said making a deal wasn't the only thing that was holding him back here.
He kept saying, I don't want killers going free. I don't want killers going free. And
He thinks that the ones in prison might be guilty.
Of the Polderman case, right?
Yeah.
But what I don't understand is why he would give a shit one way or the other. I don't buy that.
Vendeville explained to us that if he shared all he knew, he'd end up being responsible for the release of dangerous people, dangerous killers. He had a problem with that, he said. He didn't want that on his conscience. We asked him, just to clarify, you mean people like Scott Baldwin? No, not Scotty, Vendeville said. I know Scotty. I don't believe he's guilty. This isn't about him. In fact, Vendeville said he was even willing to give us some info about Scotty's case for free, both about who had, allegedly, actually committed the crime, and also about how the cold case team had investigated the case. As for who really did the crime, Vendeville said, it was Alan Nutter. My best friend's stepdaughter was Alan Nutter's daughter, he explained, so he'd heard all about it from her. And as for Scotty Baldwin's story, that ties to Silent Observer, he said. Vendeville wasn't talking about Stacy and her brother-in-law's tip to Silent Observer back in 1989. What Vendeville meant was that Scott's case had something to do with Detective Workema's involvement in Silent Observer. If Workema tells you some evidence and you go plant that evidence, he's going to make sure you get a reward for it, Vendeville said. And then he mentioned something about favors Workema had done for him over the years. What kind of favors? In exchange for what? I asked him. The in exchange part doesn't matter, he told me.
You know, he's so cagey. He'll say something but not give you all the information. And I say, well, what do you mean about that? Then he backtracks. Like, he just gives you enough that you stay wanting the next piece of information. And then
he's a con man. That's his whole thing. He's good at finding information.
Right.
Like, he's constantly trying to find it, and he's trying to use it to his advantage.
So what exactly did Vendeville think happened in Scott's case? What was the cold case Silent Observer tip he thought was so important? He wouldn't give us an answer. But he told us knowing something happened doesn't mean much anyway. It's not about knowing that something happened. It's about getting that piece of paper that says, hey, this did happen. That's what's important.
He said something about, you have to find the piece of paper to prove stuff. And yeah, he's not wrong, because I don't know that you could take him at his word.
Oh, you absolutely can't. Yeah. Not a single word he says can be taken for what it is.
We don't trust a lot of what Richard Vendeville has to say, and we certainly can't just take his word on anything. But his name does come up over and over in the cold case files, and he'd known things, or claimed to know things, about the Jeff Titus case and Corky Lard's case and others. He might have useful information. But what we wanted to know right now, while we had an opportunity, was more about the case where he had once been the prime suspect.
So going back to the Polderman case, did he seem so he seems pretty convinced that the other 5 are guilty, right?
Yes, he does.
Did he say why? Did he give any?
He said, it doesn't make sense. They all said I was there.
By they all said I was there, Vendeville meant the Polderman defendants. Apparently, he thinks all 5 of them accused him of committing the murders. And he said he believes in his heart that all 5 of them are the ones who are actually guilty. But for many years, the police had been convinced he was the actual killer. And Vendeville claimed they tried to build a case against him based on evidence that, he says, they'd planted and tampered with.
Basically what he was saying, he gave a description of like a pyramid was built for the Poldermans, like a pyramid of evidence, right? And it was Vendeville, 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 Vendeville. And all the evidence was leading up to Vendeville. This is like Workema in charge, right? And all of a sudden it was like Ben did it with Vendeville. And then it was Brandy did it with Vendeville. And then it was Andrew did it with Vendeville.
But then something happened. Something that made Vendeville no longer a suspect. Vendeville wouldn't explain exactly what this something was. He talked in vague terms about how a piece had shown up on the playing board that shouldn't have been there. And when the other detectives tried to figure out how that piece had ended up on the board, Workema had been forced to admit he'd placed it there himself.
And so Workema's pyramid came tumbling down, and they didn't know how to explain how Vendeville had been put in the pyramid to begin with. That's how he kind of explained it.
As Vendeville explained, using his pyramid analogy, after the pyramid that was built on him had collapsed, detectives had been left to rebuild a case out of the remaining pieces, which put them in a tough spot. Because if those pieces weren't valid against Vendeville, why should they be valid against anyone else? As Vendeville put it, now they have to justify why every piece of that pyramid was there to begin with.
That is kind of what happened, and then finally decided, you know what? All the people were saying we're Vendeville, they were all together. Vendeville was not there at all.
Right, and how do we get rid of all this fake evidence against Vendeville? We gotta get rid of Workema. That's how he explained it.
That makes sense. Like, the particulars matter here.
The general story that Vendeville outlines seems to track with the events laid out in police reports. At first, detectives believed Vendeville was the killer. They'd gone out and interrogated people who had eventually broken down and confessed to assisting Vendeville with the murders in some way. They built a pyramid of evidence based on the idea Vendeville was the culprit. And then something blew the whole thing apart. But as Susan said, the particulars matter here. What was the piece that had shown up on the playing board that shouldn't have been there? How was it discovered?
If you ask anything, he doesn't like that. He only gives you a little info and then changes subject. So no.
Because he knows the info is his currency.
There were a few more tips Vendeville was willing to give us for free, though. He had a lot of things to say about Mike Workema. He's not a huge fan of the guy. But whatever Workema did isn't the important thing, he claimed. Mike Workema is just the tip of the iceberg. He's the guy who started it. But it goes way beyond him, Vendeville insisted. In Vendeville's retelling of the story, whatever it was Workema had gotten up to, the other detectives had figured it out. And then they'd covered it up. And then everyone else had gone along with the cover-up too. You've got judges and prosecutors that are just ignoring facts and evidence because it turns the guilt to innocence, he said.
He's got, these conspiracy theories about everything. He's like, it goes far beyond Workema. He's like, this involves everybody, like judges, like
prosecutors, attorney general, like this is way bigger.
There was a lot Richard Vendeville wasn't telling us, though he would be willing to for a price. And that wasn't going to happen. And anyway, as he had said to us himself, you don't need me to find the answers. The answers are pretty much there if you know where to look. We told him to call us if he changed his mind. For now, we'd have to keep looking. But first, it was time for Scott's resentencing hearing. Next week on Proof.
This was a horrible crime. An elderly man bludgeoned down just for drug money. There's no question we are absolutely certain of the guilt of the defendant. The jury just got it right.
You're giving me information that I...
This is information that no one knew, apparently.
Yeah, and that's what we call a clue.
So I just told him in his ear before I left so nobody else could hear me, "Dad, I love you. I'll see you again soon." And then I just told him I'm sorry.
There's all kinds of letters and stuff in there he wrote where he did say, I told Workham all about this and I told Workham all about that, and he didn't listen to me.
You've been listening to Proof, a podcast by Red Marble Media in association with Glassbox Media. We'll be back next week with episode 11. Send us your questions and comments at proofcrimepod@gmail.com. We'll respond during our bonus episodes, Proof Sidebar, on Thursdays. Kevin Fitzpatrick is our executive producer. Our theme music is by Ramiro Marquez. Audio production for this episode is by Michael Ulatowski, Michael Alfano, Karen Encarnation, and Jesus Arbaez. Our social media manager is Leanne Cook. And thank you to all our sponsors who make this podcast possible. Follow us everywhere with the handle @ProofCrimePod and on our website, proofcrimepod.com. That's all for this week. Thanks so much for listening.